unavailable this week. We were not able to reach him, but it's good to have all of you. By the way, you're probably wondering what Essex Porter's studio looks like. You can see for yourself because we're live streaming the show on Facebook, on YouTube. You just search for KUOW Public Radio. And team, before we get into the news, I'm just wanting to know, how was the blizzard for everybody? Yeah, that's about it, right? I mean,
I loved it. Honestly, I loved it.
Why did you love it?
I have a 4-year-old, and being able to have outdoor activity in a pandemic winter weekend was like delightful. We just sled all day and made snowmen, and the streets were just taken over by neighbors. It was like the perfect pandemic weekend. I feel weird saying that. It didn't seem to be tragic in Seattle. Correct me if I'm wrong or missed anything. And it was like communal in a way that you don't really have this time of year in COVID. So we had a great weekend, frankly.
Did you sled down?
And then it melted.
And then it melted. Yeah. You sledded down city streets or sledding on a grassy hill?
Oh, no, streets. Yeah, definitely streets. Yeah.
Very good.
It's funny which block was for high schoolers, which was steeper versus for the little kids like my kids. Different blocks at different age groups, it seemed, based on how severe the hills were. Yeah. That's
fantastic. How about you, Essex? Did you notice the blizzard?
I live in Seattle as well. It was great to see the snow pile up. It was a weekend where I didn't have to work the snow. My wonderful colleagues did all the heavy work. I had 12 inches of snow on my car to finally brush off, so it'd be ready for Monday morning. It was great in my neighborhood. People were cross-country skiing, and and it was one of those good snowstorms. As Karen said, it melts the next day. That's exactly what we need.
I thought the snow was really cozy. It is the most I've seen in a single day. It was so obvious that it was the most in a single day. I went out in my backyard. I have never seen the snow that deep, and measured it also 10 or 12 inches at different times or in different little spots. I still have snow because I live at the top of a hill, and there's some little patches out there. So still having the snow thing.
Yeah, this is how beautiful it was. I didn't even shovel my driveway because it was the weekend. Because of the pandemic, I no longer leave my home. I don't need to drive in my driveway, and you knew the rain was coming. So yeah, least impactful blizzard maybe I've ever lived through.
Well, we should say, however, since the signal for KUOW reaches far beyond the city limits of Seattle, there were people who were truly negatively impacted by the snow and really had some hard times because of it.
Thank you for that, especially South Puget Sound area. And then if you went on further south, into Oregon, they just got hammered. So yes, not a reliably benign event. Okay, let's get into the news of the week. Our first story comes from Mercer Island, my home, which extended its ban on camping in parks to camping in any public area, including in your car. Mercer Island has no homeless shelters. So if the police find out you were sleeping illegally, they would drive you to a shelter out of town. Seattle's Mayor Jenny Durkin did not appreciate this.
I think what Mercer Island did was both wrong and short-sighted. I also think it's inhumane to be outlining people, basically outlining any approach for people. If you paired it with having resources and you were bringing people inside, it might be a different thing, but just to outlaw it and say you got to go somewhere else. Mercer Island went in the wrong direction, but I believe in redemption, and I hope that we can convince them and the other cities that everybody's got a role to play in this.
Yeah, the King County executive, Dow Constantine, didn't appreciate it either. He, of course, would like the county to distribute its help for homeless people and the costs more widely. And Joni, you think Mercer Island is legally on thin ice here?
Yeah, I think it probably is, because the fact that it doesn't have a shelter, this case out of the Ninth Circuit, Martin versus Weise, says that you cannot toss homeless folks off public property without providing alternate shelter space. And so Mercer Island, by trying to offer a fine of $1,000, that's absurd. And they don't have a plan for really delivering shelter. Now, the one thing I actually don't know about this is if they could make an arrangement with the Bellevue shelter. But again, what Jenny Durkin was saying is, Mercer Island's already not doing its share in the region. So it would have it, whoever is there come over to Bellevue and place an additional burden on that. And, I think that this is going to be tested in the courts for sure. And I think that it's maybe not going to really hold up because that case is pretty definite.
Anybody disagree with that?
Mercer Island does have an arrangement with other East Side shelters, but those arrangements can be complicated. I mean, what if those shelters happen to be full when Mercer Island wants to take someone off the island? And yes, I don't understand how you find someone who's too poor to have a home $1,000. And I'm really curious about this threat of jail time because of the COVID pandemic. King County and other jails have been trying to keep their populations to a minimum. Are they really going to accept someone who was picked up for just camping in a park?
Right. Of course, the pandemic's made shelters more crowded than ever because they have to be spaced out. Karen, any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, we've been hearing for years now about the lack of shelter capacity in the region. So that's the legal hurdle they'll have to prove, is that there is adequate shelter capacity and shelter space. And so it's asking for legal challenge. I agree.
So I used to live on Mercer Island, and it has a kind of a funny background, sort of always wondering how much of an island it should be. It is an island, but are you part of the region or not? In other years, they didn't want too much mass transit. They didn't want a lot of businesses that would attract people from off the island. And, they're trying to preserve their idyllic lives. This story was trending nationally on Twitter. I think because people were thinking, how do you get out of the lawsuit? How do you get away with something that many cities maybe would like to do, but can't because of the law?
I'm sure Twitter also loves a wealthy suburb like Mercer Island, without a shelter, driving people off the island or charging people $1,000. But Mercer Island's not the only city in this situation. You heard Mayor Durkin say that she hopes King County can convince all of its cities to pay for shelters, for homeless services, for more affordable housing. She said maybe the state could incentivize that. She didn't say maybe the state could mandate it. You can't so far force cities to do this. Anybody think that this threat, this move by Mercer Island, is this typical of a threat to a countywide homelessness approach, or do you think anything's going to change here?
Well, certainly there have been other threats to that countywide homelessness approach. The city of Renton objecting to a hotel being used for homeless people during the pandemic. Many of the suburban cities have had a hard time, even though having generally agreed to a region-wide approach, when it comes down to actually doing their part, especially if that includes having homeless people in their city or facilities for homeless people in their cities, then it gets tougher.
Oh. One little extra note, just speaking of homelessness, I saw the city of Seattle settled with a woman who sued them for removing her tent and her belongings from Cal Anderson Park on Capitol Hill. The city's going to pay her $10,000. Is that just the city saving litigation costs, or does anybody think this is an important, is this precedent setting? Is this policy changing, or is this just a relatively cheap settlement?
I think it's a poorly kept secret that if you sue the city of Seattle, they will pay to avoid litigation costs. You can win. I'm not trying to start anything here, but you can win something. And I think in that case, they didn't want it to, forgive the term, snowball and become something bigger. And so they just wanted to pay, settle.
But that doesn't mean she doesn't have a case. I mean, she's saying you don't get your belongings back. You get rousted, et cetera. So I don't know how it would have come out if it had gone to court. I just want
I think they didn't want to go there.
Yeah, they didn't want to go there. Yeah. Okay.
I
Listen,
thought it was interesting. I think the Seattle Times had a story about in Capitol Hill also an apartment building that was built, little studio pods that the city was able to buy and convert to kind of permanent supportive housing. And it was a pandemic moment where the kind of pod lifestyle was a developer that had built with the intention to kind of flip, and that the market rate business wasn't there during the pandemic moment, because pods, little tiny studio apartments are not what people were looking for. And so the city was able to get funding. I believe it was the city, not the county. I could be wrong though. Don't quote me on that. To buy this property. And it's interesting because it was developed for market rate housing, and now they're taking what had been ground floor retail and turning it into case manager offices and stuff. But it was 100 units or something. I mean, that's rooms. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, four walls become especially important in a pandemic, of course. Our next story this week, a couple of Seattle neighborhoods are losing their grocery store. But why? QFC said it will close 2 stores, one on Capitol Hill on 15th and one in Wedgewood. A spokesperson for their parent company, Kroger, told Como TV that, yes, the company is profitable right now, but those 2 stores were underperforming, and that was made worse by Seattle having this new requirement that big grocers pay their workers an extra $4 an hour in hazard pay.
We have seen increased business during the pandemic, and we're so appreciative of all the customers that continue to choose us for their food. But I'll tell you that we have invested that money right back in to cover things like fresh PPE for every associate on every shift. This city council mandate, it raises our operating costs 22% in Seattle.
Well, the Grocery Workers Union is not buying it. UFCW Local 21 called it, quote, a transparent attempt to intimidate other local governments from passing ordinances that would provide hazard pay to frontline grocery store workers. Here's the union's Tom Geiger.
To announce on February 16th, 13 days later, that they're going to close 2 stores seems a little too convenient time-wise to me. It seems like a direct retaliation to the local community putting that hazard pay in place. And profits are at record highs. Grocery store workers deserve hazard pay. They've been working at the front line, confronting this virus since the very beginning.
Essex, how do you evaluate those arguments?
Well, it's true that the stores have invested money in COVID safety. I mean, some of it's visible to us. We see, when we go to the stores, we see all the plexiglass that they have to help protect the cashiers. But, despite those investments, folks at Kroger managed to get an operating profit of $187 million for the most recent fiscal year. It was a 33% increase from the year before. So, Kroger has done well, and it's not like hazard pay hopefully will go on forever. These are people who, you would presume the companies are also grateful for their willingness to take risks with their health and their lives to keep the stores open. I know I certainly am grateful to them for keeping the stores open. And I do have to make a full disclosure here. My daughter works for a grocery store. She does not work for any of the Kroger stores, but I can tell you she followed this very closely.
Yeah, their profits were up more than that 22%. So, I mean, I think that's what we've seen in a number of retail businesses. I mean, some have crashed in the pandemic, clothing stores or whatever, but food related grocery, things like that, you've seen these huge, people are cooking at home, and the margins have grown more. Basically, it's become more profitable. Grocery is not the highest margin business, but it is more profitable now. And Kroger's did also increase their dividend earlier this year to shareholders. So that's a choice their management made.
Well, this was a city initiative, but Joni, the city didn't allocate money to the workers. The city had business do it. And you think this says something about the city council?
Well, I just think this is the most unfriendly to business city council that I think I've covered. And I think there's something here, so now we have the lawsuits and now we have, these 2 stores closing that were probably going to close anyway. So here's a different way to look at it, or a different way to conduct this. A different council that had like a few relationships with business would have gone out in advance of doing this. I'm totally for the hazard pay. The $4 makes perfect sense to me. It's the least we can do for the workers. But maybe we could have gone and met with the grocers and figured out, was there any other sort of mitigation we could do so that they wouldn't close stores? These stores have value to people in these communities. And so instead of turning it into, lawsuit city here, the idea was maybe if this council would meet with them and say, what could we do? What will be your response? Instead of passing stuff without even saying, what will be the impact on the businesses? I think there's a different way to do this, especially this council, which has, passes a lot of laws that impact businesses. And then it's like so shocked that they are having a reaction to it. You can head some of this stuff off.
Anybody think these lawsuits? So again, these are a couple of grocery industry associations are suing the city of Seattle. They say you're singling our business out. You're in our industry out. They say you are interfering in our collective bargaining with our employees. I think Burien is being sued along the same lines. Anyone have any thoughts about whether that those lawsuits are successful? We're not attorneys, but we're just watching.
Well, they had some interesting arguments. I don't know if they would necessarily be successful. I mean, is there a lawsuit against a minimum wage because it interferes with the collective bargaining agreement? I wonder how that argument goes if you extend it a bit.
Yeah, maybe the minimum wage is known in advance and taken into account as opposed to a sudden mandatory requirement. But I don't know. We'll watch that happen. Karen Weise, tech correspondent, you don't have to give hazard pay to a robot. How do Amazon groceries fit into all of this?
It's near that. The QFC in Capitol Hill that's closing is the Amazon's first Go store that is a kind of grocery-like store. It's not a full grocery store. I don't know if you've been in it. It's like a large bodega or something. I don't quite know though. It's somewhere. It's like a hybrid thing. But it's designed to have fewer employees. I mean, that's the purpose of it. You have no cashiers and you check yourself out, and it's staff, like there are people stocking the shelves and stuff. So, I mean, it's reducing labor costs, and nationally you're seeing different ways grocery stores are trying to reduce labor costs as well. A lot of obviously cashiers being a big, self-checkout target essentially. But you are also seeing at this moment, not at the Go stores, but at grocery stores broadly, is a lot of people are paying other people to do their shopping for them. It's the rise of online shopping during the pandemic is essentially paying people to do the picking and stuff like that. And actually Walmart just nationally introduced a wage increase. They're still not, Amazon does $15 an hour minimum. Walmart does not, but they just bumped up quite a bit their pay for those pickers that are in the stores and warehouses picking and fulfilling these online orders. So you do see this kind of shifting in where labor is and what kind of work they're doing for sure. But it's like obviously a huge cost in the grocery business.
Do you know whether Amazon is considered a grocer and they're paying this hazard pay to the workers who are at, they're not cashiers at the Amazon Go, but they have workers there. Do you know whether Amazon is a grocer for hazard pay purposes?
They certainly have more than 500 employees in whatever that threshold is broadly. I don't know the legislation to know if it's 500 grocery employees per se, but they have more than 500 employees working on grocery initiatives broadly. And, that's a huge strategic initiative for the company. Groceries are something we buy every week, if not more frequently. It's a huge market, and it's something that they have tried to go after very aggressively, including actually, with a more standard, typical type of grocery store format that they're opening. There's been some reporting, I think in the past week, that they're buying the New Seasons or using the New Seasons location in Ballard when that New Seasons backed out of, and that I believe in the Central District, another for this kind of more traditional format grocery store. It's a nut they haven't fully cracked yet. I
think we should point out that.
Oh, also, sorry, Whole Foods. Obviously, yes, there's Whole Foods here too.
Yes.
Sorry, Joni. Yes. So I don't see how they're not considered part of it. Yeah.
Right.
I think we should point out that some of the other grocery chains had like a different reaction to this. They Trader Joe's took the hazard pay policy nationwide, so that so that it would be something that even though it maybe started in Seattle, that it was carried out in the rest of the country. So.
Although Trader Joe's also canceled their
That's
summertime
true.
raises.
It's true. It's true.
Spent a little, saved a little. Okay, so that's grocery stores. We just talked Amazon and groceries. Later in the show, we'll talk Amazon beef when it comes to the beef that they're having, not with Seattle, actually, a prime New York City beef coming up a little bit later in the program. This is Week in Review, and you've got Joni Balter there from Seattle Channel, host of Seattle City Club's Civic Cocktail, and politics and government reporter Essex Porter from Cairo 7. Karen Weise writes about technology with the New York Times, and we are going to continue with Week in Review in just a moment. Stay tuned.
It's 11:27 on KUOW 94.9, Seattle's NPR news station.
In the 1980s, a judge shut down logging to save a reclusive bird.
Environmentalists are accused of turning the Endangered Species Act into a terrorist weapon.
The backlash nearly brought down the Endangered Species Act.
It is time to make people more important than owls.
How an owl swept in to save the old growth on the next Reveal.
That's tonight at 11 p.m. There's a 50% chance of rain this afternoon and overnight, also into the weekend. Expect lows tonight around 38. Tomorrow, highs near 47 degrees.
I'm Julian Marshall, host of BBC News Hour. On today's program, leaders of the world's major economies pledge billions of dollars to vaccinate the world's poorest. What will it mean for Latin America? And gunfire in the Somali capital Mogadishu during protests against delayed elections.
BBC News Hour this afternoon at 1 on 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:29. Now back to KUOW's Week in Review.
Bill Radke here. How about some good news? COVID cases have been plunging across the country in King County and statewide. Now, is it because we're being more careful, or because we have some vaccines, or so many people have natural immunity because they've already gotten COVID and recovered, or maybe we're not taking as many COVID tests as we used to? In any case, Governor Inslee says schools can now safely reopen to students, even before all the teachers and school staff are vaccinated.
We already have over 200,000 students who are today receiving at least some significant in-person instruction. And that is increasing every single day.
Inslee says children don't tend to transmit COVID as much as adults. And it's not just him saying this. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say that schools can reopen safely if they're using masks, if they're spread out in social distancing and cleaning.
They basically have said unequivocally that if we have strong health and safety measures, returning to school is a safe thing to be able to be done if we pay attention to some of these safety protocols.
Says the governor, Joni, but of course it's not up to him, is it?
These are local school board decisions, Governor. Although I did like the picture of him on the front of the Seattle Times, looking like he had taken to teaching school himself. He was
how so?
It's a picture from a little while ago, I guess. But okay. The governor can hope this can happen. He can incentivize it, which is what he said he was doing, but he cannot make it happen. And so you have, even in Oregon, which is an interesting story because the governor there, Kate Brown, prioritized teachers for vaccines and thought that schools could open February 15th there. And roughly 80% of schools are still closed and are not even thinking they're going to end up being open until maybe April now. And so it's very hard because, the teachers' unions are protecting their people and making sure that folks aren't going to get sick. And every city in the world is grappling with this issue, and many are doing better than we are, that's for sure.
In fact, Karen,
we all took so much we took for granted would be so hard to turn back on. Just like you always have school, right? It's school, but wow, we're having our difficulties turning it back on.
It's happening faster, Karen, on the East Coast than the West Coast, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought a colleague had a story about this. I thought it was really interesting that a lot of the East Coast, big cities in the Midwest and East Coast do have some more in-person classrooms, and that they have a lot of the same issues that West Coast school, there's less demand from parents in diverse school districts to put students back in the classroom. There's polling that has showed that, but there's diverse districts across the country. And one thing that was kind of intriguing to me, I'm actually curious what Joni and Essex might know about a history of this or something, but it's hypothesized that one thing was that many of the larger districts that are in the East Coast and in the Midwest, like Chicago or New York, have mayoral control over the school board and that over the school districts. And we don't obviously have that here. We have the elected board. I'm just curious, like, has there ever been a time where there's been a different structure debated in Seattle, or if you think that would even make a difference? Because right now it's a volunteer school board. I mean, that's with this role of running this huge response.
Yeah, not that I know of. I believe that we've always had, especially in the time that I've been here, there have been discussions over having perhaps mayoral control in Seattle of the school district, but it's never really gotten very far. And maybe that governance matter is very much part of the reason. Although I followed a little bit the difficulties in Chicago, and even when the mayor said they had an agreement, the school teacher said, no, we don't have an agreement, and it took another 12-15 hours before they said, okay, yeah, we finally do, after all this fighting, have an agreement.
I can think of a couple mayors over the years who thought they could do a better job with schools and either threatened to or actually proposed taking over the schools, but it never got very far. And for whatever reason here, we like to have our board oversight of our schools.
Well, the state could, I guess I'm asking, couldn't the state at least mandate on-site rapid testing, COVID testing at every school? So Oregon's vaccinating teachers and staff. What is Washington going to, if not move school staff up in the vaccine line? Is Washington going to make sure there's just testing? Testing
is good, but the experience of the folks in the White River School District is they do testing, but they don't consider it to be that much help in keeping the schools open. It's expensive. It just, you can test positive, you can test negative today and positive later today. So that's part of what they do. What really works for the school districts that have done it are the masking, the social distancing. We talk about schools being reopened and you think, all the kids are going back to school. No, that's not what happens. Some of the kids go back to school in the morning, some go in the afternoon, some don't go back to school at all, depending on what the family chooses. They really have to spread out the students, so they have to spread out the instruction. So the masking works, the social distancing works. They get the students, parents each day to attest that they haven't been sick. They do really rapid contract tracing, if a test does turn out to be positive. But when I talk with teachers, and I spoke with one yesterday, even if their school district is back and things are kind of working out, they're still nervous. And while the biological science says that teachers don't have to be vaccinated, you also have to work with the social science, and the teachers want a vaccination priority, and they will continue to be reluctant until they have it. Because of course, teachers go home, they may be living with someone who's immunocompromised, they may have their own issues. They don't want to bring anything home. And, it seems like, their thinking is vaccination priority is perhaps the least you can do while we take this additional risk and help everybody's kids go back to school.
So that is one thing that Jay Inslee could do. He could definitely provide and set up and make sure there's more testing. But in all honesty, I don't think this works until the teachers and the staff feel safe. They have a lot of power here on this. It's not going to just be some order. You must go back to school, because you have to have buy-in from the teachers and the staff who are in the buildings.
I know. How about hazard pay? That's universally popular.
Yeah, just.
Bill, I'm sorry,
we were just talking about lawsuits minutes ago. Yes, Essex.
I was just the governor was at Puyallup School District yesterday. I listened in as teachers spoke with him. One of the things that Puyallup School District did is they brought teachers back into the building without the kids back in July. They worked all summer on getting their protocols straight, figuring out what they would do, how things would work. Teachers were more confident when the kids finally came back, and they, again, bring them back slowly and have plenty of distancing. So the teachers there are feeling safer, and they said so to the governor. What the governor is trying to do as he visits these districts is to get other teachers to see this example, maybe even visit some of these districts personally, so they can also gain confidence. But again, I think vaccines are a hurdle. It's not necessary biologically. The CDC says it's not a requirement. It's not a necessity. But the social science among teachers is different, and you have to address that science as well.
I was texting with one of my college roommates who is a pediatrician, runs a pediatric practice affiliated with Duke in North Carolina. And she sent me, we were texting as, working moms talking about our lives right now. And she sent me a study that her colleagues at Duke and UNC had done, published in Pediatrics, so the leading pediatric journal, that found, because in North Carolina, a lot of school districts actually were open, and 100,000 students over a 9-week period were in classes, and they found only 33, I believe it was, cases of transmission in the school using contact tracing. And actually none of those were to teachers. They were among peers, and largely with little kids who were not subject to the masking mandates. So I just keep thinking that a lot. It was just such a, it's not zero, but it was much lower than I think I personally had expected. And she's dealing with her patients who are kids who are struggling with all the problems of being out of school. And just the fact that it was actually zero to teachers was interesting to me too. It's one study, but it's one study in an important journal. So that number is in my head.
That fact, that low transmissibility among young people, is the thing that could break through earlier than we're all sort of fearing the return to school is going to be. And if you do it, there are successful examples. So if you maybe take a narrow population and begin introducing them to the schools again, and then if that works, then you can move on. I mean, you can go step by step. And so there's talk about bringing different populations back slowly, like the disabled students and some others. And if you can do that, you can maybe build the confidence among the teachers and the staff that we can go back in the building and we can do this.
One thing I hear from my colleagues in New York is that, because there is such a essentially split opinion among parents about the design. I mean, polling has shown parents it's not exactly 50-50, but it's not that far off. That even when schools open up the option, you still have low attendance, or relatively low attendance. You're not like slamming a class full, and so it naturally does distance more than you might expect, and then that's part of how they've been able to manage it.
And there may be more pressure coming here, on school districts. The governor is signing, really in a few minutes, the legislation that passes along a lot of money to school districts to help them deal with COVID safety. But the governor was talking yesterday that districts that are not reopening probably were not going to get the money because they're not going to need it unless they reopen.
Okay, so there's the science, the biological science, there's the social science, and then there's money.
Yes.
Another very powerful motivator. Okay, well, speaking of public schools, the superintendent of public schools in Seattle is not running for re-election. She's leaving when her contract ends this year, Denise Juneau. Mayor Jenny Durkan also leaving at the end of her term this year. The former police chief of Seattle, Carmen Best, left her job. 3 of Seattle's most important public leaders, all women. And Joni Balter, you had the good idea of getting all of them together at town hall and talking with them. What did you want to know from these leaders, and what did you find out?
Well, so, I was thinking, and this is a program that I do with Seattle University, the Institute of Public Service. So I was thinking, Seattle and Washington, we set the standard for the country. We do a marvelous job of electing and appointing women to top public jobs. So a lot of the folks thought, okay, we have a national reputation for electing and appointing these people. We're good. We're done. I wanted to know what happened next. Now, clearly I am inspired by the fact that in 1 year in Seattle, a very tough year for everybody, that's for sure. But in that year, these 3 women leaders who were so proud that we, either elect or we appoint, felt they didn't want to continue in these jobs for a variety of reasons. What was it about? Did it have anything to do with gender? And it's not like we actually, we didn't fully answer that, like, yeah, 100% it does. It was more of an academic question. And I think, but the answer is, it does have something to do with gender. You say, well, wait a minute, if we're so open to having these people in these jobs, what's that about? The question is, what happens next after they're elected, after they're appointed? Do we treat them differently from men? And so, just a couple of examples. I didn't know this. Jenny Durkin broke this news about the superintendent, that she has a great salary. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with her salary, but she makes less than her male predecessor, and her interim successor, another male, is also going to make more than she does. And you said, well, okay, but it's such a great salary or something like that. But if you think about it, and this is what she said, she was so candid on the show, as were all of them. Oh my, they sort of just freed each other to talk. But she said it's a way of undervaluing or devaluing a person in a job just by, oh, well, we'll always get a salary less for you.
But is that what the school board, what does the school board say? I know this is always a difficult question. It can sound like a gotcha question. It's not. I just want to know, how do they evaluate whether that pay disparity had to do with gender or not?
That's a fair question, and I don't know the perfect answer to it. I just think, this gets into how women conduct themselves. They're terrible at negotiating. We're terrible at negotiating salaries, guilty as charged. So that could be part of it, but it's also the idea that you can probably cut a deal sometimes with women for less money. And in the case of Carmen Best, remember when she was leaving, what was going on in the city. The city council was asking her to take a pay cut, her and her command staff. She wonders and thinks that you wouldn't have asked that of a male counterpart. I said, well, during a pandemic, maybe you would of a male police chief, but I'm not sure. And so one of the things we missed the other night, and I'm sorry because these things get away from you, as you know, is we never were able to ask them, but I know their answer because I prepped a couple of topics with them. Can women be sexist to other women? The answer is yes. And so some of this, it was at the hands of the female city council for Chief Best.
But it's something you guys might remember. I seem to recall when Chief Best was appointed chief, she actually wasn't on that short list. Do you remember there was the short list
right.
and there was a set
short list.
Yeah, that there was a
so there was an uproar then.
There was an uproar there. How could this Black woman not be on the list? And that kind of put her back in the running. And that part, if I remember, there was reporting that came out that said that the committee that was looking at this felt like she was too ingrained with the police department and not a change agent. And I think that was some of the critique that ended up coming out this summer of, obviously a summer of immense challenge. But that was some of the critique that ultimately came out, that she wasn't a change agent internally at a moment that they needed it.
Yeah,
well,
so
you're
exactly
exactly
Seattle,
right. She was not on that short list, the first short list. You're exactly right. But I got to say, folks, any city in the country would be thrilled to have Carmen Best as their police chief. And, she got into it with the folks here, and anyway, she's leaving, or gone, rather, gone.
Essex?
Yeah, it's interesting on Superintendent Juneau, whether you're comparing her to her male predecessors. Superintendent Juneau was the superintendent of schools for an entire state before she came here. I don't think any of her predecessors or successors have that sort of experience. So I don't understand why she would be earning less.
And here's one reason is that pay disparities, a pay gap gets imported. So if someone is used to making less, then that can be self-perpetuating. And you may not be able to have concrete evidence that there's the reason right there. But you can look at the statistics and the trends and know that happens over and over again. Okay, should we put, yes, anything else, Joni?
I just want to say
anything else about what you learned from this panel?
Well, I already knew this part, but what the other thing that was sort of hard to not buy are the protests at the home during the summer of Seattle City Council member Deborah Weise and Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin. So this was all about defund police, but the language used was so appalling and so sexualized for both of their homes. We didn't say some of the words because then they were just very misogynistic terms. And so we compared it to a male council member who had the same political position as Deborah Weise on defund. And yeah, they didn't say nice things outside his house, but it was none of this sort of sexualized kind of language. And so I think that it just points out some of that. Now, we were doing this for our students, our Seattle University students, many budding future leaders. I wanted to make it sort of educational in that regard. So what I loved about this conversation was how easily they flowed. They sort of comforted each other to say things that are really personal and embarrassing and just the little burdens they've been carrying. I just didn't think it made sense for these people to leave and we don't hear from them about this.
Mm-hmm. You're listening to Week in Review. That's Joni Balter, who hosted this event at Town Hall Seattle. She's at Seattle Channel, hosting Seattle City Club's Civic Cocktail. We've got Cairo 7's Essex Porter, New York Times' Karen Weise, and we're going to get to what's making us smile when we come back. Stay tuned.
Thanks for listening to Week in Review on KUOW 94.9, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:49.
KUOW thanks SCCA Proton Therapy for their support. Learn more about business support at kuow.org/business or email business@kuow.org.
50% chance of rain this afternoon and overnight. Expect lows tonight around 38. Tomorrow, chance of rain, as I mentioned, and highs near 47. It's 12:50. Let's get back to KUOW's Week in Review.
This is Bill Radke. Thanks for tuning in this week. We've got Essex Porter, Joni Balter, Karen Weise, a tech correspondent at the New York Times. We know that Seattle's got mixed feelings about Amazon and its headquarters here, how much it brings in jobs and taxes, how much it pays in taxes or doesn't, how much it drives up prices. But at least Amazon and Seattle are not suing each other. What is happening in New York City?
Oh, yeah. So Amazon and New York City and New York State, actually, I should say, are
That's true.
dueling lawsuits over pandemic safety concerns at two buildings in New York City, one a big warehouse in Staten Island and one a delivery depot in Queens. So it's largely focused on the Staten Island one. And they've been, in discussions and talks, and there's been an investigation since the spring. And then Amazon preemptively sued the state AG last week, saying that the state AG essentially doesn't have authority over workplace safety. It's a federal issue. And then sure enough, the AG's initial lawsuit that they were trying to preempt came out this week. And it's just pretty messy. And I think part of it is a reflection of, we're used to having Amazon as a major employer in the state for a long time now. And they're becoming major employers across the country. Actually, GeekWire had a great analysis this week showing that Amazon now has more employees in California than in Washington State. And this is what's, they're on this historic hiring spree. They have more than 1 million employees now, and they have a lot more political relationships to maintain as well. Separate from the specific concerns in this lawsuit, they are they're employing people everywhere, which obviously gives you political power as a large employer, but that also means you have a lot more constituencies to serve.
What was this about to you, Joni?
Well, I think Amazon is notoriously bad at local politics, local and state politics. They don't seem to get it. They don't know how to work with a jurisdiction. And, the background here, everybody knows here in Seattle, they didn't pay attention to the local scene soon enough in their growth here. And so they made a lot of enemies. And that's why even if they're not in lawsuits, they've been fighting with the city council for a long time, when they could do, the sort of government relations approach, which isn't working well because they don't seem to get it. And I would just say they're messing with the wrong person, Letitia James. I mean, she's New York's Bob Ferguson. She is very active, very aggressive. She goes after tech companies. She went after Trump. If Amazon's not providing enough COVID safety in these warehouses in New York, I guess the courts are going to decide. But it just seems to me that they're so good at getting the package from their warehouses to the folks out in the world, but they have to figure out a different way to do their politics.
Anything to add, Essex?
No, it is very different. Since Amazon grew up here, many of us grew up watching Amazon grow up, and we're sort of the welcoming hometown. Only in recent years. Only in recent years, really, is the area, looking at some of the downsides and trying to determine whether Amazon is contributing enough to its fair share of helping the region grow well in a way that benefits everyone. So, but the other interesting thing to me is, Amazon held a huge competition among cities about where headquarters should be. And then for many of these cities really didn't get that many benefits. I mean, they're building, a sort of headquarters in New York, and New York didn't give them a dime. So, maybe we're more valuable as a place than we've been thinking we were.
Well, the second headquarters search was great for acquiring information about the cities, but it didn't really improve Amazon's sort of role among cities, or its image among cities, of how it lands in a place and connects or doesn't connect with that city. So I think I know they learned something from that second headquarters search.
And so much of the angst about the relationship in Seattle is really about the kind of white collar, high pay work here. And a lot of the relationships around the country, including in New York, are a lot about this kind of $15 an hour work, essentially. I mean, I should say specifically the lawsuit, obviously Amazon says they had world-class safety measures in place during the pandemic. And that's essentially kind of the issue that's being contested was that true? Did they meet the legal obligations in the state, or does the state have say over it? But this is about warehouse work. It's not about the kind of angst over high pay, affordability, the crisis that the city of Seattle is seeing right now.
Well, we've got warehouses here too. Do you think there's going to be any effect here locally?
Yeah, although not that many in the city limits, none.
Just
but
and
down. The big ones are down in Kent. But you do have some of the kind of delivery spaces. I actually got stuck. I'm down in Georgetown. Did you know there's that double-decker warehouse in Georgetown? There's a 2-story huge warehouse that Prologis built. And I must be an Amazon delivery station, because I was driving there and all of a sudden this like fleet of the vans came out surrounding us. I felt like I was in a little video game, like this little car with these gray vans. A swarm. It was definitely a swarm. Clearly it was that time in the shift where the vans get launched.
Well, it's that time in the shift for us to end on something that's making us smile before we say goodbye. Even if you don't like a lot of rain or snow, the benefit of it is that we'll have that much less to worry about when it comes to drought. So I smiled at the snowpack being, I think it was like 118%. I follow this stuff anymore. So there was a smile. I also smiled knowing that local space industry workers and students are smiling up at Mars because the NASA rover landed safely there, and engineers in Redmond helped make the Aerojet thrusters that slowed that rover down as it was landing. Students at Western Washington did research for the design of the cameras on board, so that's always kind of cool. What was making any of you all smile today and this week?
There are these 2 trees on 12th Avenue near Seattle University, and they're nothing to look at. They're kind of spindly, and they're some kind of cherry, and they're kind of confused, to be honest, because they always bloom in either earlier to mid February. And whenever I see those trees, I go, okay, it's going to be all right. Winter will leave, everything will start blooming, and spring will be here. And
yeah, I've noticed it's earlier in the mornings.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay.
It's getting lighter too. Any other smiles?
I'm excited. We're taking my son to the Burke Museum this weekend. It's our 3rd time's the charm. We had tickets in November just before it closed down again, and then tickets last weekend, which were canceled for the snowstorm. So this is our weekend to see the T-Rex skull. It's been a year in the making. We miss the T-Rex skull. So
you're going inside a building. It's all distance.
I know.
You feel good.
Yeah, they have time tickets, and you can see, I think there were like 30 other people that have tickets for the whole time slot that we have. It's a big museum. So if there's 30 people in that whole space all masked, I feel like that's not inappropriate. But it will be the first time we're in a space like that besides like a grocery store or my son's school. Yeah. So
the ceilings are high enough for a dinosaur.
The ceilings are very high. Yes.
Essex, anything you're smiling at?
Well, first, I don't know if this is making me happy, but the end of that Trump impeachment trial makes me feel like 2020 is finally over. Kind of like walking through a passageway. Whatever happens, good or bad, now 2021 gets the credit going forward. And well, what truly is making me smile is I just seen reports that a couple of Star Trek series have just resumed shooting in Canada, including Star Trek Picard. And that gives me something to look forward to.
I know you're a big fan. Well, that's great. You guys always make me smile. Thanks for coming and being our Week in Review panel this week. It's great to see you all.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
Essex Porter reports on government and politics at Cairo 7. Joni Balter hosts Seattle City Club's Civic Cocktail on the Seattle Channel. And Karen Weise is tech correspondent at the New York Times. And I hope we'll do this again soon, everybody. Thanks. Week in Review is produced by Sarah Leibovitz. We've got social media and live streaming by Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Tia Popescu. Thanks to both of them, and thanks to Sarah for her production. And thank you. We couldn't do it without you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.